Welcome to the Checklist for Survival, a series of videos produced by John Stewart, president of QP Consulting, Inc. This video is the third in that series and it is titled Critical Financial Ratios Comparing Leaders versus Laggards. For additional information about John Stewart, or to view his first video on sales per employee, visit his website at www.quickconsultant.com. Now let's visit John Stewart and hear what he has to say about some of these critical ratios.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending upon when you're viewing this video. This is what I call video number 3, but the formal title is Critical Financial Ratios, and most importantly, Comparing Leaders versus Laggards in this industry. As are many of my videos and seminars, it's based on information that I've gathered for more than 25 to 30 years of consulting and speaking in the industry. And most important, as you've heard me mention in prior videos, I get an awful lot of my information. It's not secret information. The information I get is all published in this benchmarking study published by NAQP and APL. Today I want to concentrate on some of the key ratios in the industry and how they compare to each other. We're going to be looking at payroll expenses, cost of goods, and overhead expenses. But more important, we're going to look at the top 25%, and we're going to compare them to the performance of the bottom 25%. And you're going to have to decide, based on what you see in this video, as well as hopefully what's revealed in that study, if you purchase it, the difference between the winners and the losers and where you fit. By the way, we call them leaders and laggards because that's politically correct. I used to call them the winners and losers, and some people got really upset. Why do you call them losers? Well, you have to call a spade, I guess, in this industry. Anyway, we're going to be looking at about six slides this morning, and the first one you may have seen in prior videos. In fact, if you've watched some prior videos, you have seen this one slide. So this slide, which we're going to cut to now, simply demonstrates the profit and loss comparisons from 1983 through 2009. The most critical things that we want to know, of course, our sales increased from $336,000 in 83, and in 2009, the average printer in this industry was reporting $1,016,900 in sales. Obviously, sales have increased, and they'll continue to increase even in this economy. But more important are the key ratios, and once again, we're going to get into the ratios of the very best compared to the very worst. But if we look at the average across the board in this industry, we're going to look at three critical subcategories of expenses. We're going to look at cost of sales. Cost of sales was running 29.7. Forget the dollars for right now. That's really not that important. 29.7% in 1983. It dropped a little bit, 29.5% in 1995. And in 2009, it was 29.5, exactly what it was, 7, 8 years ago, 15 years ago, I'm sorry. Okay, now let's look at another expense. So another key expense that you need to be breaking out and pay attention to. Overhead expenses. 83, it was 28.1%. In 1995, it's 27.6%. In 2009, it was 26.9%. Actually, you'll notice that the 26.9% actually dropped since 1983 when it was 28.1%. The critical expense and the critical category that we're going to look at is payroll expenses, and you're certainly going to see that in the next few slides. In 1983, payroll was running 24.3% in this industry. By 1995, payroll expenses had gone to 28.6% in the industry. By 2009, 2 years ago, payroll had gotten to 32.9%. I'll have some further comments on payroll expenses and how to trim those, but I will tell you right now, the difference in profitability in 1983, profits were running 17.9%. That was the average profitability in this industry. 17.9, out of every $1,000, there was $170 left over for the owner. 1995, profits had dropped to 14.2%. Not too bad, lots of excuses. Most of the excuses don't hold water, but they dropped. 2009, owner's compensation or profitability dropped to 10.7%. And believe me, that's atrocious, and it's something that's plaguing this industry, but it is a solvable problem, excuse me. Okay, let me erase that one. We're going to go to a new slide. And the new slide is, you're going to see this in just a minute. It's called Income and Expense Analysis, Leaders versus Laggards. This is probably one of the most revealing slides in this entire presentation, and I'm going to pull it up now. Okay, we're going to move to our second slide in this presentation, and it's called Income and Expense Analysis, Leaders versus Laggards. Now, some of these slides, not all of them, will be available later on on my website, but for right now, we're going to take a look at this slide, and we're going to use my iPad version, and we're going to start looking at all companies, the top quartile and the bottom quartile, and we're going to show you the major differences. We've already talked about what all companies in this industry do, and there's no big surprise with, we've got cost of goods around 29% here. We've already mentioned that. We've got overhead expenses at 26.9%. Payroll, 32.9%. Remember I told you how dangerous payroll is getting, and it's going to put a lot of businesses out of business if they don't pay more attention to payroll costs. Okay, let's take a look now at the bottom 25%. How are they performing, and why are they in the bottom 25%? Well, first of all, you'll notice the cost of goods is about 30.6%. Not a big difference between cost of goods for the bottom 25% as opposed to the average in this company, in this industry, excuse me. Now let's take a look at overhead expenses. Overhead expenses are running 30.8%, and that compares to the 27% for average companies in the industry. The killer here is payroll expenses. That's the red bar. Remember, red is bad, red is dangerous. Notice in the bottom 25%, it's over 40%, 40.4%. What happens when you add up 30.6, 40.4, and 30.8? You get a minus almost 2%. That means the bottom 25%, the average profitability is a negative number, 2%. You'll see that displayed even more vividly in an upcoming slide. Let's take a look at the top 25%, and you'll notice that once again, cost of goods is about 27.5%. Not that big a difference. You notice overhead, 21.9%. The winners in this industry do a lot better in overhead expenses than do the laggards. Lots of reasons for that, high depreciation costs, high rental expenses, and there's some others as well. But once again, the killer ratio is payroll. Notice that the top 25%, their payroll expenses are running 25.5%. Compared to 40.4%, I mean, once again, that's the big difference in this industry. And the result is, when you add these percentages up, it leaves 25.2%. That is the average profitability for the top 25% of companies in this industry. Is it 23, 24, 26? It's all in that range. A huge difference in profitability. Okay, now we're going to move to the next slide. This is a slide we're going to be talking about now, and you're going to see it when I go to the iPad. The key ratios, 2007 versus 2009. No big deals. The 2007 performance, we had cost of goods at 29.1% right here. Okay, we had overhead expenses 26.9%. Payroll, once again, 31.4%. That was average for the entire industry. Move ahead 2 years to 2009. This report, this financial operating ratio study, was published in 2010 based on 2009 figures. In 2009, we have cost of goods. Okay, cost of goods is 29.5%. Overhead expenses, 26.9%. Notice they've remained identical. Overhead expenses haven't increased. Cost of goods percentages is almost identical. What happened to payroll costs? Payroll costs, once again, went up to 32.9% from 31.4%. That's not a statistical fluke or an error or part of the margin of error. That's a real increase in payroll costs. The result is we went from 12.6% owner's compensation or profitability in the industry down to 10.7%. And quite honestly, if I projected it out to 2011, 2012, I suspect that number is going to decline even further. Now, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, my next slide is taken from the benchmarking study, the financial operating ratio study that we did for NAQP and APL, and it's payroll percentages versus owner's compensation. Once again, we're going to compare quartiles. As I've mentioned before, if we take a look at all companies, the average payroll cost is 32.7%, leaving the average owner in the industry with 10.6% owner's compensation. Let's take a look at the bottom 25%, the bottom quartile as we call it. Owner's compensation, payroll expenses, 40.6%, minus 1.5% on using these figures here. Let's move to the top 25%. Notice that payroll expenses, 26.8%. That compares very favorably with both the average in the industry and certainly in comparison with the laggards. Notice the difference in owner's compensation for the bottom 25% at 1.5%, and we move to the top quartile here, and we're at 20%. That's 20% average owner's compensation for the top 25% in this industry. Once again, that's a critical number, and the number is being impacted more than anything else by payroll costs. If you're not controlling your payroll costs, or they're getting out of hand, or getting in the 31, 32, 33% range, you're facing serious problems, whether you know it or not. Now let's move on to another slide here. The next slide we're going to deal with is distribution of owner's compensation in this industry. Some people argue sometimes, or will tell me that, well, you know, the people who participate in these operating ratio studies, I don't know how reliable the numbers are, because probably only the best, the people that want to brag about their operating ratios or financial statements. So we tend to attract the better companies, and the most troubled companies wouldn't participate. You know, so that would skew the statistics. Well, I think this slide that I'm going to show you debunks that myth quite clearly. Notice that this is somewhat of a classic, what's called a histogram, using standard deviation. As it turns out, distribution of owner's compensation in this industry pretty much follows what's called a standard histogram. This is the average level of profitability in this industry, in the 10, 11, 12%. That's all companies in the industry. But notice that while we have companies in the 14% range, the 15%, we have companies in the 20%. This is 20% down here. By the way, this chart will be available on my website. We go 24, 26, 28, 30% levels of profitability. Is there some bad data up at that end? Possibly, but we check the data pretty carefully to avoid data being skewed and outliers. We eliminate the outliers. Notice, though, that we've got companies down here on this lower half of the curve here, with companies at 4%. Here's 0% profitability. We've got minus 6%. We've got 12% minus. We've got companies reporting down to minus 18% levels of profitability. And believe me, you can actually report levels of profitability of minus 18%. You're not going to do it for long, but that is because we're counting depreciation as an expense. It is a real expense, but it's not realized in hard cash outlays. So believe me, there are a lot of companies in this industry that are in that bottom half, that bottom 25%, and I hope you're not one of them. If you are, you need to watch this. You need to return to this video, the earlier parts, as well as some of the prior videos, to see maybe what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. Now we're going to move to our last slide, is payroll percent, the industry's greatest challenge. And I've already talked about this at length, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But notice that payroll in 1983 was 24.3%. 1995, 28.8%. Notice this slow increase in payroll expenses. 2007, it was averaging 31.4%. 2009, 32.9%. I'm projecting, based on common sense, looking at this data, that we could be looking at payroll percentages. I'm sorry if I've misused the name. We're talking payroll percentages. It would not surprise me that if things are not done in this industry, that the average level of payroll percentage will reach 34% and above. I can't stress the importance of concentrating on your payroll expenses. You need to gather your payroll expenses under one heading, monitor that number very closely, and most important of all, do something about it. With that, thank you very much for watching this video. As I said, you'll be able to pick up some of these charts on my website, and also you will be able to avail yourself of an 18% discount on this study. If I haven't mentioned that previously, there will be a slide showing you who to contact at NAPL, the name of the lady, and they'll give you an 18% discount on the purchase of this study. I don't benefit, I don't get commissions on the sale of these studies, believe me. So, but I believe it's in your best interest to seriously consider buying one of these studies. So with that, thank you very much for viewing this, and have a great day. Thank you.